better than that. Put your hands together. This is Wes McKinley and the Old Cowboys, and Mr. McKinley here is one of the inspirations for this rally here today. Those of you over by the tents, come on over, join us.
I want y'all to give it up big and loud for Patrick Malone right now. He's going to lead us off. We got more speakers to follow, but right now, Patrick Malone.
Thank you for coming to Denver, the bottom leg of what I call the Denver Triangle. Now we're going to have a little participation here out of the audience. I'm going to give out a name. Raise your hand if you've ever heard of it. Rocky Mountain Arsenal. You got a lot of damn nerve gas. Where the hell did it go? Anybody know? What if it just happens to still be there? How about Fort St. Vrain Nuclear Power Plant? What happened to the fuel rods from Fort St. Vrain right up the street here? How about Rocky Flats Nuclear Weapons Plant? Now, I know a lot of you don't remember it, and I want to thank you for not remembering it, because we have done everything we can to wipe it out of history. Personally, I did a little camping. I've never been camping before. I never slept in a teepee. Anybody here ever slept in a teepee? Anybody here ever slept on the railroad tracks? Well, I can tell you it's not comfortable, especially in the winter. My friends and I started off in the beginning of May, and we were there till the middle of January 1979. And in case you haven't noticed, it's a little cold in Colorado in the wintertime. Now, we had a little wind gauge outside called the wires, electric wires. And we knew there was trouble when they started humming, because then the wind was over 60 miles an hour. You ever tried to walk to the Sanilet with 60 mile an hour wind when it's 25 below zero? I'm going to give you a hint. You don't walk, you crawl. You crawl to that outhouse and you go really fast. Well, I want to thank the Department of Energy for giving us a chance to try out camping out there. And personally, does anybody remember the teepee on the railroad tracks? Where is it? It's in my garage. Now, you know why it's in my garage? I was the last person arrested there. And I'm going to tell you, to be honest with you, I was like, where the hell have you guys been? It's cold. Camping out is really cold when you wake up in the morning and you have icicles on your mustache and your beard. Well, we're aliens, run. Okay. Well, we're here because Rocky Flats is still there as a Superfund site. Anybody know what that means? Super dirty. Now, why is that super dirty place somewhere where they want to put some wild animals? I don't have any idea. Oh, I got it. What did they do with the nerve gas arsenal? They turned that into a wildlife refuge. Anybody seen any of those animals lately? They're weird looking. And the ones that are going to be coming out of Rocky Flats are going to be weird looking. Now, everybody here lives downwind of Rocky Flats. The radiation that they left out there in the ground is still going to take another 5 years just to get rid of the barrels, if they run out there in the middle of the night and get rid of them. If not, we're going to go out there when they open that up and check every square foot of that place and say, is this safe? Is this not safe? What are they going to do when we start taking soil samples out there? Well, I want to thank all you guys for being here. Do you happen to know what that building is there? That's the Judicial Heritage Building. In the mid-'70s, I helped build that. And then I ended up there as a client several times. So I want to thank you all here. And if you're interested in getting arrested, raise your left hand. and I'm taking names, and I want to thank you very much.
All right, everybody, that's Patrick Malone, and Patrick brings up an important issue. I saw him asking several people out here, how many of you have heard of this? How many of you have heard of this? And I saw some hands going in the air, but I didn't see all the hands going in the air. And the truth is, a lot of people are coming to Colorado, and they're brand new to this situation. They've never heard of Rocky Flats before. And that's part of the reason why this event is so important and why events like this are so important. We have to get out there and we have to educate people on Rocky Flats, right down to what it was from the very beginning, because people have never heard of it before. This is the most contaminated site in the United States. It's just a few miles from Denver, and most people who've come to this community haven't even heard of it before. So that's why we have all of the booths over here with a lot of information, which you can go check out. We've got our Vadans for Progressive Action. We've got Peace and Justice. We've got Rocky Flats Downwinders. We've got Rocky Flats Right to Know. The attorney who is in charge of the lawsuit against Fish and Wildlife and the Secretary of the Interior, Randall Weiner, he has a table over there as well. He'll be speaking later. We're going to have a number of speakers to talk about this, but if you don't know about Rocky Flats, ask. There are plenty of people here who have tons of information. They've got pamphlets, they've got maps of where the barrels were buried. This is the most contaminated site in the history of the United States. And the idea that they're even going to open one part of it without sufficient testing to make sure the public is safe is ludicrous. We all need to work on that. Right now I want to bring up, we have a gentleman by the name, there he is, by the name of Jim Snook. He's going to come up here and read a poem. He is a former Colorado legislator. Please welcome Jim Snook.
Thank you, folks. I just wrote this as we were driving up here from Springfield yesterday, but I think you will understand what I'm saying. Many years ago, if you go south of Boulder, Colorado, you'll come to a sorry little patch called Rocky Flats. Some say, by the way, it was just another government mistake. They spent millions or billions to no avail. It was just another mistake for the government to fail.
Thank you, Jim. We also want to give out some information on Jefferson Parkway. Now, those of you who haven't heard about this, this is a highway that's been proposed that would run through some of the most contaminated areas of the Rocky Flats zone. We're calling it the Plutonium Public Highway. We want to put a stop to it and make sure that people are not getting exposed to that highway, so you want to ask at each of the tables about that. We also have boxes on several of these tables for cash donations. Events like this and the information that gets out there, most of this is done by volunteers. Pretty much all of it is done by volunteers. But as you notice, we have food out here today. We're feeding people. If you want to throw some money into the kitty to help with the food, we really appreciate it. If you want to throw some money into the kitty to help us with talking to school boards about keeping kids from doing field trips out to the former sites of Rocky Flats, which is an issue right now, please throw some money into the kitty. It helps us out tremendously. Now, I have two people I'd like to bring up to talk right now about the school boards. Now, part of Rocky Flats that's controlled by Fish and Wildlife, there is part of that they wish to open up to the public, and that's what we're fighting against here today. We have gone to school boards and asked them not to send their kids out there, and a couple of school boards have already agreed, including just yesterday, Westminster Public Schools superintendent has said that they will not be, you can applaud, it's fine, has said that they will not be sending any of the kids out there on field trips. And this is important. This is part of what gets in the public eye, and it makes people more aware of Rocky Flats, because I'll tell you what, as soon as we stop talking about it, that's when the bad stuff happens. The conversation has to continue. So I'd like to bring up right now a couple of people who've been really big on that conversation continuing. Would you please welcome up to the stage right now, Marion Whitney and Ted Ziegler. Come on up, Marion.
It's a pleasure to have everybody here that's attending. And we are trying to reach out to the district schools to stop our most vulnerable people in society that are vulnerable to deception, children. excuse me, the adults have the right to make an informed decision for themselves. Rocky Flats is not safe by any means. Never has been. I went through 4 major contractors of Rocky Flats, and they all had the same conduct of operation out there, contaminated, and you were safe as you worked there. Our local 8031 had a huge role in trying to prevent contamination issues out at Rocky Flats, but it was always Department of Energy and the contractors that made us vulnerable to working on a plant site with these conditions, and the same environment exists today for children or anybody visiting the plant site. Thank you very much.
And we were working on the Jefferson School Board. And so you can email the Jefferson County School Board and tell them what you think about the field trips out there. And you can go to the meetings, you get 3 minutes to speak. And if you live in other school districts, find out where you go for meetings. I mean, this isn't something that's easy, but you can learn to do it. And really, some of the people that talked at the meeting regarding that road that they want to build out there, one lady has a son who has cancer, and she was one of the most impactful speakers because she just told what they're going through. And there are other people whose families have a member of the family, and that's what's been going on. And so we need to get the word out and learn how you can help. And we have meetings, Rocky Flats Right to Know, monthly, and it's our website, so find out and come join us. So thank you.
Chris, jump on in here.
Thanks for coming, folks. Good to see you all. So Rocky Flats is just the local manifestation of a larger issue, and that is the whole world has all these nuclear weapons, and we're all kind of losing sleep over the fact that maybe someone's going to actually use one. Don't you think that'd be an awful thing? Yeah, it'd be bad. It would cause a lot of pain and suffering, not to mention death and destruction all over the planet. Just using one nuclear weapon would be enough to trigger significant global warming and climate change. So, if you notice, I've got this t-shirt. It says, nuclear weapons are illegal. And this is news. The United Nations just started taking signatures on a treaty banning the use, possession, and threat of using nuclear weapons. This is a result of a couple of years of conferences all over the world by non-governmental organizations, and it was under the auspices of the United Nations, and they just completed that process this summer and started signing the treaty just a couple weeks ago at the UN. Now, you're probably wondering, why didn't we read about this in the newspaper? Well, the United States government is against it. So the US press isn't really talking about it. But we are. So, no nuclear weapons. Disarm now. Write your congressman. Write your senator. Write the president. Tell him to sign the treaty banning nuclear weapons at the United Nations. Thank you very much, folks.
All right, everyone. I'd like to take a moment and welcome up a gentleman to the stage right now who has direct experience with Rocky Flats. And by direct experience, I mean he worked there for 37 years as a radiation monitor. He was also president of the Steelworkers Union. And I think that something that's important to note as we work on this project is the people who have come out in favor of keeping Rocky Flats closed. You have people who've worked at the plant. You have the FBI agent who was in charge of the raid on Rocky Flats. These are people with direct experience with the plant, with what's been going on, who've been watching it for the last 40 years. And we are coming up on the 40th anniversary of the first protest. These are people who've been watching this a long time. They know what they're talking about. And these are the people you're going to want to talk to. Remember, this doesn't end with just the one rally. After we're done, you talk to each other, you exchange your emails. That's how we keep the conversation going. A very important part of this conversation, I would like to welcome to the stage right now, put your hands together for Jerry Hardin.
Good afternoon. The reason that I decided to say a few words here today is because we try to represent a group of sick and dying Rocky Flats workers. If you have internet capability, there are a couple websites I'd run in front of you. One of them is EEOICPA space DOL. And on that website this past Monday, they posted statistics. We've had over 3,800 workers from Rocky Flats that have either died prematurely or suffered one of the god-awful medical effects. The government has settled claims with those people for over $525 million. The problem with that is there's still thousands of workers that have claims hanging in abeyance that are being ignored. The plant has ruined a lot of lives. The other thing that I wanted you to know is that Rocky Flats, in my estimation, is the deadliest work site in the state, bar none, keeping in mind the 3,800 workers that have already either perished or suffered health effects. So we're very concerned, and that's what brings us here today with our crusade. We're not focused on anything other than our fellow workers. There's an event coming up October 28th at the Westminster Veterans Memorial Garden at 104th and Sheridan. And that's the Atomic Workers' Day of Remembrance that was declared by the U.S. Congress. And if you have an interest, the events will start at high noon. And you're certainly welcome to come and participate with us. To add credibility, October 28th, I believe it's a Saturday. And if you've ever been to that Memorial Garden background, it's a beautiful place. The other thing I would tell you is that we have a difficult time identifying with some of the people because they don't choose to participate with this. In fact, there are only three or four of us that were ever working at the Rocky Flats facility. I personally carry a plutonium body burden in my lungs of about 36 rem, which is not a huge number. But the reason I throw that out is not to get sympathy, but to add credibility to what I'm telling you. I've been there, I've done that. And a lot of poor people are, in dire straits financially and mentally due to the way that the government has handled them and their claims. If you notice here today, there aren't any federal politicians in the audience. And that to me is a national disgrace. And hopefully you share that view. And that's what the workers sorely need right now is some political muscle. So again, I appreciate your interest, and I appreciate your patience with me. And keep up the interest in Rocky Flats workers, and let's hope for better days. Thank you again.
Come on, another round of applause for Jerry Hardin. And remember, it's not just about the one day. You're hearing from people who've been fighting this fight for 40 years. And that's another important part of what we're doing. It's important to remember all of the workers who are still suffering from the effects of the radiation at Rocky Flats. We're going to have a little more music right here. Wes and the company are going to plug in. And then we're going to have a couple more speakers before getting to our keynote speaker, Krista Iverson, who is on her way right now. She wrote the book Full Body Burden, which if you're not familiar with is probably the greatest nuts and bolts on Rocky Flats that has been written along with Wes McKinley's book, Ambush Grand Jury. So we're going to hear from Wes. We're going to hear from Kristen. Right now, we're going to hear a little bit of music. In the meantime, take a moment to talk to your neighbors. Get their emails. Get their phone numbers. Next time we come out here, we're going to want more people. Have them call someone they know. You call someone you know. And all of a sudden, the size of a rally doubles. The next time, the size of the rally triples. And before you know it, you got a few hundred people out of every rally. And every person in Colorado, even if it's their first day in the state, hears about this disaster and how important it is to keep Rocky Flats closed. So thank you so much. We're going to be back in just a moment. Right now, I'd like you to give another round of applause to Wes McKinley and the Old Cowboys. Ladies and gentlemen, music makes a nice segue into our next speaker. One of the most important things in getting news out to the public is community radio. And we got a great community radio station here called KGNU. You can applaud. KGNU, which has been a huge part of the fight to keep Rocky Flats closed, and back even further to get Rocky Flats closed in the first place. If you're not familiar with community radio, it's listener supported, it's donor supported. It's like public radio, only better. Anyone in the community can get involved, and their station runs entirely on volunteers, and one of the most important, and their membership director, is our next speaker. Would you please give a round of applause to Nikki Kaiser?
Hello, everybody. Well, KGNU is proud to be a media sponsor of this event to keep the dangers of Rocky Flats in the forefront. We've been doing that together for 40 years. KGNU went on the air on May 21st, 1978, a month after the first blockade of the railroad tracks leading into and out of Rocky Flats by Dr. Daniel Ellsberg and others, who became the initial arrest group. I imagine there's people here who remember that. Both actions came out of the optimism and positive energy of the times. We had finally gotten out of Vietnam, but the war machine was still rolling along at quite a pace. We wanted a foreign and domestic policy that reflected our values, our interests. Here was a nuclear weapons plant in our backyard, upwind of the Denver metropolitan area on sacred native land. We didn't want transuranic trace elements in the Broomfield water. We didn't want Rocky Flats workers exposed to radiation from spills. We certainly didn't want a foreign policy influenced by the interests of large corporations. What do we feel about that? We didn't want our hard-earned tax money going into Rockwell International's pocket, paying for $500 hammers. And we certainly didn't want to pay for bombs we didn't want, that at best were never used at the expense of social programs that could actually improve people's lives. Once people were informed, they did something about it. We closed it down. KGNU's piece in that was to inform people. American Friends Service Committee started finding out what was going on at the plant, and KGNU brought the community together to discuss what we wanted. The Truth Force and later Rocky Mountain Peace and Justice kept the issue in the public awareness with the help of KGNU. We all worked together to exert local control over large corporate interests and corrupt federal spending. It was a natural alliance. KGNU was one of the hundreds of community radio stations that were formed in the 70s out of the Pacifica model created by Lewis Hill. He was a pacifist in California who created a series of 5 stations starting with KPFA in San Francisco and KPFK in Los Angeles. He and others saw the terrible effects of well-funded propaganda during World War II. They believed it was the job of governments to inform their citizens if they wanted democracy to work. We needed a chance to debate issues in depth, in a safe and transparent way, outside of industrial influences such as the ones that worked hand in hand with Hitler. Lewis Hill's concept was simple. He believed that bringing all points of view together in informed inquiry would really create better policy. He believed that this was the way to prevent violent conflicts. He believed in people to make good decisions for everybody's best interest. Lewis Hill had another very radical idea that public radio, that people said would never work at all. His model was that listeners would voluntarily pay for this service. It was the only way to avoid corporate influence in programming. In Boulder, there was a frustration in 1978 that commercial stations were backing off of covering women's issues, issues of race and class. In fact, CU closed down its college station. That's how KGNU acquired its frequency, which is, by the way, 88.5 FM, 1390 AM. We're in Netherlands, we're in Fort Collins, and there's extended interviews on news.kgnu.org. It must have been about 1980 when I was invited onto a panel discussion about Rocky Flats with Ellen Claver. I'm sure many of you know her here. KGNU had moved off the picnic table by the Boulder Creek into an office building above the Aristocrat, an incredibly greasy spoon on Broadway. I see people smiling. You remember that. The station was so small you had to wait out in the hall because once you opened the door, you were on air. I remember how blown away I was that all opinions were not only accepted but welcomed. Short of using swear words, we could say anything we wanted. We could, as we used to say, speak truth to power. It was a very powerful experience. People were coming from all over the country, solar rollers from Vermont, tons of people connecting all kinds of issues. Many people in this crowd have vivid memories of those powerful times, I'm sure. KGNU was deeply a part of all that was going on and still is today. KGNU is celebrating its 40th anniversary next year. Looking forward to 40 more because there's still work to be done. 40 years later, we're still dealing with the consequences of Dow Chemical and Rockwell International's operations in our foothills. We're concerned about sources of clean water, fracking close to Longmont schools and homes, GMOs in our fields, and Boulder's desire for its own electric utility. These are all expressions of a desire to exert local control over large corporate interests. KGNU creates a forum to inform ourselves and includes all voices in the community. Actually, I don't know how a community takes on big, complex issues without a community radio station. Thank goodness we don't have to. I'm making a short documentary about KGNU for the 40th, and there's Ginsberg reading poetry on the track, and Ellsberg waving the peace sign as off he goes, off to being booked for being arrested. KGNU's story and the story of protests at Rocky Flats are inextricably connected. KGNU enables this community to be a mouse that roared. Lewis Hill's model is still working today. This week, a member rejoined saying, "I greatly appreciate the work you all do there at KGNU. Independent media and reliable, intelligent sources are vital for the health and sustainability of local and global community." Power on, she says. Well, power on indeed. I hope you all help us celebrate our 40th. Thank you.
All right, and don't forget, you can go to KGNU, you can donate, or more importantly, perhaps most importantly, you can volunteer. You can be part of this. So talk to Nikki about that when you have a moment. And speaking of people who've been involved in this for quite some time, I'd like to welcome to the stage a young lady who has been doing this for 40 years, since the very first protests in favor of closing Rocky Flats. She's still involved. She's part of Rocky Flats Peace and Justice. She's part of the Colorado Coalition for the Prevention of Nuclear War. She's a very important voice in this cause. I would like you to give a big round of applause right now to Judith Moehling.
Thank you so much for being here, and thank Bonnie and all of the crew that created this. And of course, Wes McKinley, it was his idea from the beginning. And I want to make sure that you know that all of this problem with Rocky Flats came from the production of nuclear weapons. And we still have 49 armed nuclear missiles in Colorado that are part of a missile field of 500 weapons. So this coming Tuesday night in Boulder at the community room of Alfalfa's from 7 to 9, 2 of the remaining nuns who broke into missile silo N8 are going to speak about the importance of the ban treaty and what they've done and the time they spent in prison and why they would choose to go to prison. And I think that if you come, you will be enthralled. There's also going to be, they'll have a time in Denver when they're speaking and a time in Colorado Springs when they're speaking. So you can find out all about it on the website, thecoloradocoalition.org, or the Rocky Mountain Peace and Justice Center website, rmpjc.org, has all that information also. So 49 armed nuclear missiles. We need to get them off of hair trigger alert. Thank you so much.
A little bit louder than that for Judith Moehling. 40 years of work deserves a big round of applause. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to introduce someone who's been a big part of what comes next as far as Rocky Flats and keeping it closed. Stephanie Malin is a professor at Colorado State University, a sociologist of environment, globalization, and development. She wrote the book, The Price of Nuclear Power, Uranium Communities and Environmental Justice, and perhaps most importantly, she is leading the health study that's going on right now about the soil, about the contamination at Rocky Flats as part of the effort to further investigate the area and make sure that it is safe and that it is closed until we are 100% certain that it is safe. So if you would please welcome someone who is very important to this cause right now from Colorado State University, Stephanie Malin.
Hello everyone, thank you so much for being here today. I'm gonna move this down because I'm short. Well, it doesn't move, so you're gonna see just the top part of my head. I am here to talk to you guys about the Rocky Flats Health Study. As many of you may know or may be learning, Rocky Flats has quite a legacy of plutonium contamination and other contamination, not just in Arvada and Westminster, but throughout the Denver area. And there has not yet been a community-based health study done, which may seem shocking, but there have been a lot of studies that have looked at official data that the state has through the Cancer Registry and the Colorado Department of Public Health. But the Rocky Flats Downwinders contacted us a couple years ago, letting us know that they and many other people in this community want to tell their stories about rare cancers and rare diseases and other issues that they are having and you all may be having that are related to exposure to the site and to contamination from it. I have a fairly long history of doing these sorts of studies throughout the West in communities like Arvada and like Westminster that have had nuclear facilities. I did a lot of research down in the Four Corners region. And unfortunately, this happens everywhere I go and study. People who have been exposed to nuclear contamination, but who have their claims negated by the state or by the companies that were in charge of the facilities. In other words, they tell them they're imagining things, right? That their health problems are not connected to exposure. But we still want to get out into the community and hear your stories and do epidemiological research from a different perspective. So I would love if you would contact us about if you have issues that you're dealing with and you lived here during the time the plant operated or afterwards. Please contact myself or my graduate students, India and Travis, back there, who are working on the study. Some of you may have spoken with them as well. They are doing wonderful work. You can visit the Rocky Flats Downwinders table to get much more information on this, and we also have some sheets as well. If you want to take my contact information on my card, I would love to hear from you, and we will record your story as quickly as we can. We also, though, are doing this study on nearly no money. As you know, funding is very difficult to get, so if you have $5 or $10 and you want to help donate to our study, I'm running a crowdfunding campaign as well, because right now we are doing this whole thing on about $1,500. So any help you could give us would be very, very welcome to help capture as many of these stories as possible. Thank you all so much for being here today. My name again is Stephanie Malin, and I'm helping lead the Rocky Flats Health Study. I would love to hear from you. Thank you so much.
Right now, we're going to have a musical performance for you. Once again, we're going to have Wes McKinley and the Old Cowboys, but this time they're going to be joined by Tom Songs. And Tom here wrote a fabulous song called Rocky Flats. And believe it or not, it is about the thing that we're talking about today. Tom is going to come up and perform that song for you. One more time, I want to let everyone know that if you want to make any donations to any of the causes here, there are boxes available on the tables. If you want more information, go up to the speakers and talk to them. The conversation doesn't end here. As I've said before, the bad things happen when we stop talking about them. Rocky Flats is something a lot of people still don't know about, so please, please keep the conversation going. Right now, would you please welcome to the stage songwriter and activist, Tom Songs.
Thank you. Rocky Flats, you'll always be nuclear debris. Poor old Rocky Flats, nuclear debris. Rocky Flats, nuclear debris. Grand jury convened to investigate Rocky Flats when it hit the headlines. The Justice Department tried to kill the messenger, bury these environmental crimes. Now I don't hike or bike or breathe near Rocky Flats where the earth's too dangerous to farm. That's why I'm telling all my friends near Rocky Flats, do not underestimate the harm. Rocky Flats, you'll always be nuclear debris. Poor old Rocky Flats, nuclear debris. Rocky Flats, nuclear debris. One more. Rocky Flats, you'll always be nuclear debris. Poor old Rocky Flats, nuclear debris. Rocky Flats, nuclear debris. Rocky Flats, nuclear debris. Hey, Rocky Flats, nuclear debris.
Big round of applause for Tom Songs. And we will also be hearing from Wes McKinley again in just a few minutes. We got several speakers right now. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm really, really excited to introduce our next speaker. Kristen Iverson has been one of the most important voices on this issue, and it's a pleasure to welcome her here. She flew all the way from Cincinnati, where she is the director of the Creative Nonfiction Program at the University of Cincinnati. And part of everyone's education on this issue, and certainly my education on this issue, is Kristen Iverson's book, Full Body Burden, Growing Up in the Nuclear Shadow of Rocky Flats. It won the Colorado Book Award. It won the Reading the West Book Award. It was chosen as one of the best books of 2012 by Kirkus Reviews, the American Library Association, and Mother Jones Magazine, and the best book about justice by The Atlantic. All the reviews are fabulous. All of the awards are deserved, but most importantly, what this book does is it talks in the most microscopic detail about the very human cost of these gigantic issues. When we see these coming at us, it's so easy for us to tune it out. This is so big, it can't possibly affect us. She dives into how it affects each and every one of us, and I'm very excited to hear her speak today. So ladies and gentlemen, would you please welcome one of the single most important voices in the fight against Rocky Flats, Kristen Iverson. Let's try that again, because that was kind of weak. Please welcome Kristen Iverson.
Thanks so much to all of you. Thank you for being here. And it's so nice to be here in Colorado. It's a beautiful day in Colorado, and it's a beautiful day to have a rally, isn't it? It is, yes. So I guess what I want to say, and I'm just going to take a couple of minutes, is that today we call again for the same things that we have been asking for from the day this plant opened, and that is truth, transparency, and full disclosure of what has happened in the past. Is that still? Is it good? There we go. Truth, transparency, and full disclosure of what's happened in the past, historically at Rocky Flats, and what continues to happen today, ongoing and present conditions. And I mean that with respect to three areas in particular: the history of Rocky Flats, the contamination issues of radioactive and toxic contamination that happened in the past and continue to the present day, and ongoing health effects and the kinds of things that we must be aware of as we move into the future. And as you all know, plutonium has a half-life, a very, very long half-life, and we're going to be talking about this for generations. I want to briefly emphasize those three things. I think I've spoken about Rocky Flats now. I've been on the road with this book for almost 4 years. I've spoken all over this country, and I've spoken all over the world. One of the things that's most interesting and most troubling to me is that people in other states and people in other countries, and by that I mean places like Edinburgh, Scotland, and London and Mexico City, people in other countries know more about Rocky Flats and pay more attention to the contamination issues that are going on than people right here in Colorado. This is a very important story. Historically, it's an important story. We were the heart of the Cold War effort in the United States, and it's important for us to recognize how important this story is historically. It's important to recognize that there has been and there is ongoing contamination issues that we have to pay attention to, and we have ongoing health concerns that Stephanie just talked about. We have to pay attention to that. Currently, there is no signage out of Rocky Flats. Unless you happen to read my book or happen to drive by the Cold War horse, you don't know. People don't know that there is a risk or potential risk and danger associated with this property, with this site. So I'm very concerned, deeply concerned about these issues. But I also want to take a moment to commemorate all of the people who have been working for decades with respect to truth and transparency at Rocky Flats. And by that I mean people who are here today, some of the people that have already spoken, and also Tiffany Hansen, Bonnie, Michelle, Leroy Moore, so many local people who have devoted years and decades to this issue, and also people like Daniel Ellsberg, who continues to be involved with Rocky Flats issues, people like Bonnie Raitt, musicians and artists, including artist Jeff Geip, who designed the Cold War horse. We have a legacy here that we should be really proud of. I also want to mention the history of the workers and the whistleblowers who worked in this area. And I'm talking about people like Jackie Brever, who was an employee out at Rocky Flats, and she was the first person to talk to the FBI, and her very honest and brave testimony that put her at great personal risk led to the FBI raid in 1989. Jackie has passed, and so we honor her memory. I'm also talking about people like Jim Stone, a worker at Rocky Flats, who Yes, who was, again, a worker who more than once stood up and said, this is what's going on, it's dangerous, we need to pay attention, the public needs to know. And I'm talking about people like Carl Johnson, and I notice there's a sign here today. Dr. Carl Johnson was the Jefferson County Health Director. In 1976, the year that I graduated from high school, he reported that there were 44 times more plutonium in the soil than the government was admitting. He initiated a number of studies with the NIS and others that looked at contamination in the soil and looked at the health of the workers, where he found a higher level than expected in brain tumors, and residents, people who lived around the plant. And in his studies, he found a higher rate of leukemia and cancer in people living around Rocky Flats. He was one of the first state officials to stand up and say, look, this is a bad idea to build next to this plant. This is contaminated. We're seeing health effects. We're seeing contamination in the soil. In 1981, he was fired for standing up for the truth and telling the truth. He did not want to have any housing permits within 10 miles of the Rocky Flats site. A year later, and this is a part that in my neighborhood, we didn't learn about this part. We didn't hear about this part because we were misinformed about what was going on. We were told, in my neighborhood, a lot of people worked at Rocky Flats. There was a lot of misinformation and a lot of secrecy. We were told that Dr. Carl Johnson had been run out of the state, that he was wrong, that he was incorrect, and that he had been run out of the state. That could not be further from the truth. Later studies confirmed what he found. He left the state for another job, a good job, and he won a whistleblower lawsuit against Jefferson County. So this is, in my book, he's a hero. And we need to remember the legacy of Dr. Carl Johnson, one of the first people to stand up. So Dr. Carl Johnson was right. He was right about keeping people off that site. He was right about no development near or adjacent to the site. And he was right about informing the public, that we need to keep the public informed. So what I want to say today is let's keep that site closed and let's tell the truth about it. Thank you.
I think we need a bigger round of applause than that for Kristen Iverson. She came all the way from Cincinnati. And I also want to thank, we got a lot of press out here today. I want to thank all of you for being here. We got Channel 4 right back there. Denver Post is out here. Got a couple of documentary film crews. If I haven't mentioned you, if you're with the press, thank you so much for being here today. This is how we get the word out. And if the press doesn't know about it, give them a call. They love tips. So once again, thank you so much, Kristen Iverson, for coming out here. We have a few more really, really important speakers here. I do also want to take a moment to mention Jackie Brevin and some of the other employees who are no longer with us. Could we give them a round of applause for doing so much work? Right now, I'd like to bring up two very important speakers. We have Paula Elofsson-Gardin from the Environmental Information Network, who has been on the front lines of the fight with her organization since 1986, and a wonderful advocate for the health and safety of citizens around Rocky Flats, Joe Moore. Would you please give them a round of applause right now?
Let's have a moment of silence for the workers and all those who have passed and still suffering from Rocky Flats nuclear contamination. Hello everyone, my name is Joe Moore. I was born in 1975. My parents lived in Leiden, Colorado, 1 mile from Rocky Flats nuclear weapons plant, where the nuclear trigger was made. John Goffman, a nuclear scientist, said plutonium is the most dangerous substance known in the universe. Our friends and neighbors fed my mom well from their garden when she was pregnant with me. Fires in 1957 and 1969, releasing contaminated radioactive fallout, resulting in many people getting sick. Upon my delivery, the doctors discovered a large grapefruit-sized malignant tumor, neuroblastoma. It was wrapped around my aortic artery. My parents were heartbroken. The only known cause of this cancer is exposure to plutonium, according to the Beer 5 report. Thankfully, surgery at 2 days old removed most of it. Chemotherapy destroyed the rest of it. At 17, I was diagnosed with acromegaly giantism, caused by a benign pituitary tumor. 2 brain surgeries and a gamma knife radiation therapy destroyed most of that tumor. Damage was done, causing excess growth hormone resulting in my height. It happened to me, it can happen to you. Or someone you love. Absolutely no need for nuclear power plants. We have photovoltaic solar panels, wind turbines, hydrogen fuel cells, geothermal steam turbines, bio-hemp seed oil. During switch crop, zero tolerance for nuclear technology. Plutonium and people don't mix. Rocky Flats should remain an exclusion zone. There is no safe nuclear contamination level while EPA keeps raising it. A brand new line of homes built directly south of there with families with children digging holes and playing in the yard. There's a dog park on Indiana Street causing cancerous tumors in people's pets. The DOE doesn't care. The EPA had its budget slashed thanks to Trump. Pro-nuclear loves to normalize plutonium exposure. Ionizing radioactivity contaminates exponentially and is man-made, not naturally occurring. It's not like walking in the sunshine. It's not like flying on an airplane. Denial, deception, and disinformation are a malignant cancer that runs rampant in our world. And then there's Fukushima, in a store near you. We're all downwinders now. Thanks for listening.
I'm Paula Ellison Gardane. I'm the Executive Director of the Environmental Information Network. We worked for decades to research and bring out information that would educate the community about what was going on at Rocky Flats, the contamination, especially of the waterways going to public drinking water supplies, and the toll on the workers and the community is unconscionable. This is an area that should never become a nuclear playground. It is exclusionary in itself. People should never go out there for recreation. Kids on field trips do not belong out at Rocky Flats. It's critically important that people understand just because there's been a passing of a couple of decades does not mean it's no longer there and it's no longer a danger to anyone. It's statically attracted to litter and pine pollen, and it has transport mechanism for hundreds of miles, and there is a lot of plutonium dust free suspension to go around for everyone. You may be susceptible, you may be resistant, but do you feel lucky? It's like stray bullets. Don't go out there. You don't need to be out there. Our family is missing a family member because of that place. Like Joe and Barb, my sister spent part of her pregnancy in Leiden, just over the hill from Rocky Flats. And her baby, my niece, was born hydrocephalic with parts of her brain missing. And the doctors asked her, "Where did you grow up? Where did you spend your pregnancy?" And she said, "We live where they make Coors beer." We had no idea about Rocky Flats. And that baby suffered before she died because we didn't know. We weren't told. We were all lied to, from the employees and the workers to the community. Don't go out there. It's not necessary. Just say no.
think you can do louder than that for Paula and Joe. Thank you so much, both of you.
Now, we've talked a lot about the exposure. We've talked a lot about what the community has done, but we have to remember there are a lot of tools in this fight. There are political tools. There are community tools to keep the pressure on. There are also legal tools. And one of the fellows who's leading the legal fight is attorney Randall Weiner. He is currently representing in a suit against the Department of Fish and Wildlife and the current Secretary of the Interior. You might know him from his plane trips. The attorney representing him, Randy Weiner, represents Rocky Mountain Peace and Justice Center, Candleless Glows, Rocky Flats Glows, Rocky Flats Right to Know, Rocky Flats Neighborhood Association, and the Environmental Information Network. He also happens to be my uncle, but don't hold that against him. He has been on the front lines of the fight for environmental regulation in Alaska, in New York, and here in Colorado. Would you please welcome to the stage right now, Randall Weiner.
God, what a nephew, huh? Okay. Did he pay you to say that? So in 1970, the National Environmental Policy Act was passed to require federal agencies to take a hard look at the environmental consequences of their actions before they took those actions. I represented the 5 groups that nephew Nick just told you about to try to force the Fish and Wildlife Service under the Department of Interior to take a hard look at the consequences of opening Rocky Flats to the public, just as required under the National Environmental Policy Act and a couple other statutes. It seemed as though the agency was going to open Rocky Flats as early as this summer without conducting the kind of environmental reviews that are required. We brought the case, and in a affidavit from the head of the Rocky Flats portion of the Fish and Wildlife Service, David Lucas, he said, "Oh no, we're not planning to open Rocky Flats until next summer." Now, if you look on their website, you will see a statement saying they plan on having their visitor center open next summer. Well, it takes a little bit of lead time to open up a visitor center, a 35,000 square foot visitor center. So there's going to be a great deal of construction. When was that going to begin? That's why my clients went to court to say, wait a second, comply with the law, let's slow things down. Now, yesterday at 3:04 p.m., the federal district court judge, Judge Arguella, dismissed the lawsuit. But she did it in such a way that she left open the door for my clients and additional groups and individuals to go back into court if the Fish and Wildlife Service doesn't do it right. If they don't prepare an environmental assessment or an environmental impact statement under NEPA, the National Environmental Policy Act. So this judge wanted to give the Fish and Wildlife Service a chance to do it right, to do the kind of studies that might actually show how dangerous it is to open up the refuge to the public. Yes. Now, she said in her decision, maybe the Fish and Wildlife Service will, after it does its design and after it does the requisite environmental studies, maybe it will reverse course. I think she used the word, maybe it will halt it. So we are hoping that the Fish and Wildlife Service does it right. That's why we brought this lawsuit, to force them to do the environmental studies that are required. Remember, environmental cases they seldom actually stop politically ludicrous projects. But they do slow the process down long enough for the political process to catch up. And that was the purpose of our suit. Now we're skeptical, we're quite skeptical that the Fish and Wildlife Service is going to do it right. And why are we skeptical? We're skeptical because this agency keeps saying that Rocky Flats is safe for, got to get right, unrestricted use and unlimited exposure. This was a decision that was made over a decade ago. Oh, I like your voice. I'll need it in a second. So why did they make this decision? And did the Fish and Wildlife Service, or the agencies at that time that made that decision, did they use a reasonable methodology for determining that Rocky Flats is safe for unlimited exposure and unrestricted use? Well, Rocky Flats was so contaminated that there were infinity rooms. Infinity rooms were called that because the Geiger counter went to infinity when folks were trying to get levels of the infinity rooms. These rooms are buried below 6 feet at Rocky Flats and many feet below that, and covered not with a cement cap like in most Clean Water Act cases that I deal with. It's covered with nothing but dirt. Now, when it was time to make the determination of whether Rocky Flats was safe, the agencies excluded any of the samples taken from 8 feet and below. Even though, as we know, that dirt can come to the surface. Now, was that a reasonable methodology? The agency overlooked the fact that burrowing animals like prairie dogs and groundhogs dig right into the zone at the depth where the infinity rooms and the other contamination is. And some of these burrowing animals bring up to over 10% a year of the subsurface soil to the surface. Now, was that a reasonable methodology? No. Now, the detection materials or Geiger counters that were used were gamma radiation detectors, whereas most people who know the issue know that plutonium is primarily an alpha emitter. Was that a reasonable methodology? No. What about the winds? The Fish and Wildlife Service overlooked the fact that there are 100-mile-per-hour winds out there. Was that a reasonable methodology? No. And what about the floods that have occurred recently? The 1913 flood, a flood 2 years later that was even more impactful to Rocky Flats. Is it a reasonable methodology to overlook that impact? No. So, the decision made back then by the Fish and Wildlife Service to say that Rocky Flats is safe for unlimited exposure and unrestricted use was unreasonable, irrational, and illegal. And we, despite what happened yesterday, actually because we were invited, we will be monitoring the Fish and Wildlife Service closely. And if they don't do the requisite studies, if they don't use the sound science that we now are going to demand, we will be back in court. And we will be back in court with more groups and more individuals like you standing with us. Thank you.
Thank you, Randy. All right, ladies and gentlemen, our next speaker comes to us. She grew up in Arvada, Colorado, and currently works with at-risk teens in Sacramento, California. And she is a member of Rocky Flats Downwinders, a community organization founded in 2015, advocating on behalf of those impacted by living downwind from the Rocky Flats nuclear weapons plants. Ladies and gentlemen, would you please welcome to the stage, from right over yonder, you might have heard her singing a little bit earlier on, please welcome to the stage, Denise Leonard. I said welcome, Denise Leonard. There we go.
Thank you. I put on the cartoon SpongeBob for my young boys, Grant and Connor, and left the room momentarily. This was the first day we had cable in some time, as I wanted to protect my children from the evils of cable. When I returned to the room, to my surprise, they had switched the channel to Britney Spears mounting a motorcycle in leather pants singing Toxic. I promptly turned the TV off with hands on my hips and said no MTV and no Britney. But why, Mommy, my boys ask. Because she's too sexy. Perplexed even more, my kids ask, oh my goodness, what is sexy? I pause for a moment and respond with the most motherly wisdom. Sexy is when you don't have enough clothes on. Looking even more confused, my boys replied with an okay, Mommy. So we went about our daily business for the day, and as I'm driving home, I see Dave, our neighbor, mowing his lawn on a John Deere. Dave is about late 50s, full beard. He's got about 100 and so pounds to lose. It's a hot, humid day, and he has his shirt off. As we come around the corner, and Dave comes into my son Grant's view, he asks me, Mommy, is Dave sexy? I've always tried to protect my boys from all sorts of things, including cable, MTV, kidnapping, drugs, alcohol, and cancer. I've learned that we can't protect our kids or even ourselves from many things in this world. And it turns out that Britney Spears and MTV are the least of my worries. It was in 1996 that I and my husband Pete and our 9-year-old son Taylor moved to Arvada, Colorado. I was pregnant with our second son Grant, and he was born in 1997, and with months of his birth, he developed hydrocephalus. The pressure of too much cerebral fluid between his skull and brain was causing bleeding on his brain. He was unable to crawl or hold his head up. He suffered motor and speech delays. In 1998, my third son was born, Connor. He too developed hydrocephalus, but he was also diagnosed with an immaturity in his brainstem, which when he fell asleep, he would fall into dangerously low oxygen levels. So he was placed on oxygen and heart monitors for the first 6 months of his life. During that same time period, my son that was 9 had an epileptic seizure in which the cause was unknown. In 2002, we moved to New York, and over the next decade, Connor continued to suffer severe respiratory illnesses. I also developed an unusually high heart rate and was placed on beta blockers and cardiac monitoring. The cause was unknown. In 2010, I divorced from Pete, but we continue to share a friendship and co-parenting relationship for the sake of our kids. He was diagnosed with brain tumor cancer 2015. After his surgery, it was revealed that his tumor was slow growing, probably about 10 to 15 years, and guess where that puts it back to? When we lived in Arvada. My son, Taylor, remember the 9-year-old seizure? He was just diagnosed with cancer, thyroid cancer, in 2016. I used to ask, is there some hidden sin in our life, God, that you're punishing us for? Did we eat something wrong? Is there something genetically wrong with my family? It wasn't until after Taylor's diagnosis, 20 years later, I began to ask a different question. Was there something poisonous in our house in Arvada, Colorado? I began my research and found not only does ionic radiation have a connection with all my family illnesses, but our family lived only 5 miles from the Rocky Flats nuclear weapons plant in the cleanup period. My continued research led us to participate in the Denver Metropolitan Health Survey, in which Pete's brain cancer is noted as a rare cancer, and Taylor's cancer is the number 2 cancer, thyroid, in my former neighborhood. Further explanation led me to connect with the Rocky Flats Downwinders. I'm honored to be a part of the incredible efforts of our co-founders, Tiffany and Nick Hansen, and supporting our community. Thank you. Some of the support services we offer include health and mental health services, support groups, and workshops. We have recently been approved as a 501c3 nonprofit organization and are currently working with Dr. Bobby Kite of Denver University in the continued research through the DU Health Survey. In addition, we've teamed up with Chancy McNeely and Dr. Sasha Stiles in efforts to educate our local medical professionals and physicians, as many are unaware of Rocky Flats. In addition, Shaughnessy and Dr. Stiles oversee Healthy Choices, Healthy Families, a program aimed at teaching ways to reduce exposure. Part of my contribution to the Rocky Flats Downwinders is to present our family story to organizations and those of faith. In closing, back to my Dave and Brittany story. The story reminds me of how we have to find funny. We have to hold and treasure each day. Hold on to the good things, good people in life, like the organizations represented here today are heroes, even in the most difficult circumstances. We have many good things to be thankful for. What we are talking about today is not just a Rocky Flats issue, as Kristen spoke about. It's a national and worldwide epidemic. Ionic radiation, none of us or groups can do it alone. Thank you, Bonnie, for all your work and everybody else that shared in making this happen. On behalf of the Rocky Flats Downwinders Board, my family, our hearts and prayers are with those who have endured illness. Do not isolate yourself. Reach out to the organizations to us as well. You're not alone. Thank you.
Another round of applause for Denise. Thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, we have one final speaker today. How's everybody doing so far? Yeah, this is a good start. You know, it's always another start. At the end of this rally, don't forget, go up to everyone who spoke, thank them, go up to each other, get each other's phone numbers, get each other's emails, contact info, so you can stay in touch so we can keep this issue in the public eye. Our final speaker needs no introduction, but he's getting one anyway. Wes McKinley has been up here playing music for you so far. He is a former Colorado State representative. He is a rancher. He is a teacher. And perhaps most importantly today, he was the foreman on the grand jury in 1989 after the FBI raided the Rocky Flats nuclear weapons facility. And when the Department of Energy decided that they were going to forego the grand jury and just do a settlement out of court, he was instrumental in keeping that in the public eye and keeping the fight going for people to be indicted. He has stayed on the front lines of this fight ever since, and I'm very, very glad to be introducing him right now. Ladies and gentlemen, please give a big round of applause to Wes McKinley.
Thank you. I'm glad to see y'all smiling, because I tell you what, I have pissed off a lot of people. And in the last few years, Department of Justice and Democrats, Republicans, they all hate me. I thought about over here on the table, didn't think about it earlier, I'm a slow-minded, you have to understand that, a little slow. And I thought about putting a little plate out there with some material in it, putting a sign under it. It says rat poison. And it's pretty well proven that that's really not beneficial to the physical being of the human body. Put a jar of Clorox. It said Clorox. Drink at your own risk. You know, it's up to you. If you want it, go ahead. What's wrong with the most contaminated area, the most dangerous poison in the world? What's wrong with putting a sign up that says caution, danger, plutonium has been put here? Now, we don't need to say the level. On my rat poison, I wouldn't have said 100%, 10%, or whatever, just simply rat poison. What's wrong with putting out there? It has been proven. It has been transported, disposed of, handled. It's there. I really wonder why we're testing, because it's there. What's wrong with putting that up? Well, why don't you ask Mark Udall, Lorraine Anderson, the Boulder City Council, in testimony, it's on public record, agreed with the bill that said danger, plutonium is here, and in testimony it says it may give the perception it's not safe. No joke. With the help of the Rocky Mountain Peace and Justice Center, Paula, a lot of people, they helped get the bill passed, and it was coming onto the floor of the House, and it passed. Judith worked hard on it. Thanks, Judith. And then when it went to the Senate, we had the votes in the Senate. Mark Udall called Joan Fitzgerald and said, don't let it be voted on, because it wasn't voted on. Simply goes back to the beginning. It was a cover-up. It made lots of money to put plutonium out there and scattered. It was a lot more profitable to put it on the ground than it was to take care of it. And so they just simply scared it, made profit, and to cover it up, well, how do you cover something up? I do trail rides, and Cowboy Billy, Brother Jim, this is my brother, Brother Jim, He's a little bit older than I am, but that's okay. And somebody's got to be first. And Billy was a guitar player for Roger Miller and helped get elected. Whenever we go on a trail ride, once in a while a horse makes a mess out there. You know, some of that stuff that he eats, he can't use. And Billy will tell you this poem later, it passes on through. Well, one day as an experiment, I thought, this is kind of bad to have in camp. You know, we had some sweet-smelling little city slickers out there, and I didn't want that. So I went out there and covered it up with whipped cream. Put a rose in it. Oh, man, that looked good. You know, there's this whipped cream and a rose. Pretty soon, the sun melted it, and it was a lot worse than it was to start with. Same thing we're going to do at Rocky Flats. We're going to put it into a playground. We're going to have our children out there. They have an island wave to us. There's one of my favorite little people over there on the tree. And can you imagine your child sick, deep breath? I've got grandkids that are little bull riders. I kind of worry about them one time riding a bull, but they know what they're doing. You know, I've told them. Whenever they start riding the bulls, I said, we're going to have a bull riding school. Teach you how to do this. So they come over, and I got them already lined them up. I said, okay, now get a pen and paper and start writing. So they wrote, and I said, now go to your left hand and start writing. Write into your left hand. And then we got some crutches. And I said, learn to write on these crutches. And what's this? I thought we were going to bull riding school. I said, we are. If you're going to be a bull rider, you got to learn to write with each your hand, and you got to learn to walk on crutches. And it's the same thing with Rocky Flats. If you're going to take your kid out there, make damn sure you got a whale of an insurance policy. And in your heart, know you're going to be able to watch that little body waste away. Keep it closed.
All right, another round of applause for Wes McKinley, because here's the other thing. He also brought food out. He brought out burgers. He's going to be cooking burgers for a while now. He's going to have his guitar. If anyone wants to get together and do a little sing-along with him later, go right ahead. I want to thank everyone who was involved, and I also want to encourage all of you to stay involved. One thing I mentioned earlier, the Rocky Flats Right to Know meeting, October 26th at Trinity Presbyterian Church in Arvada. Paula Olofsson-Gardin, who we heard earlier, is going to be speaking there. We have got books for you to check out. You want to go read Full Body Burden by Kristen Iverson. You want to go read The Ambush Grand Jury by Wes McKinley. You want to go read Making a Real Killing, Rocky Flats and the Nuclear West by Les Ackland. You want to talk to everyone who is involved in this. You want to go get stickers from the tables. You want to sign up for the emails, because this does not stop with just us getting together on the one rally. This has been going 40 years. And what we have to show the legislature here in Colorado and everyone involved is that we will do another 40 years if that's what it takes. We will do another 100 years if that's what it takes. The bottom line is we have to keep this place closed. We have to get the proper testing done, and it starts with all of you. When W.E.B. Du Bois was an old man, he was asked by young people, what should we do to make a difference in our society? And W.E.B. Du Bois said three pieces of advice. Agitate, agitate, agitate. The machine doesn't work unless we agitate it. So get out there, call your representatives, call your senators, talk to your local city council people, talk to your school boards, tell them not to take the field trips out to Rocky Flats, and most importantly, talk to each other. Get each other's information, because no one can do this alone. Get each other's information, keep the fight going. Thank you so much for coming out here today, and please give a round of applause to all of our speakers. Now, in closing, Chris Hormel is right over there, and he is going to be leading a remembrance event. And I would also like to thank Bonnie over here for putting this whole thing together in the first place. You going to come up and say a few words? Please do.
Thank you so much, all, for coming. Please do what our wonderful Nick says. Go talk to people. Our biggest problem is so many people have never even heard of Rocky Flats. If they've heard of it, they think it was all cleaned up. Remember, it's still an active Superfund site. Over 15 full-time employees, DOE employees, today are there. Maybe not today, it's Saturday, but anyway, they're there trying to keep the plutonium from leaking in the building foundations themselves were simply buried. So lots of plutonium still there. Would you want to go hike or take your family? The buffer zone right outside that active nuclear Superfund site, but people just don't know. So please promise yourself today, 20 people who don't know about Rocky Flats, go into a store, talk to the sales clerk. Please be bold about this. This is one of the biggest issues in our lives right now. Thank you.
Back in 1983, a whole lot of people got together and encircled the Rocky Flats site, and they held hands, made a big circle around the whole thing. Well, we don't have as many people as back then, but we can still reenact that and have a moment of silence for all the victims of nuclear weapons and nuclear weapons manufacture, just like the downwinders at Rocky Flats and from Chernobyl and all over the world. So let's all get in a circle and remember to keep fighting to keep Rocky Flats closed.